Hey everybody, and welcome back to another max velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down a huge storm that'll bring more significant severe weather to the United States later this week. In addition to this, it'll bring much warmer and colder temperatures to a large chunk of the country. I'll give you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's first begin with what's happening across the United States today. We'll first begin with the East Coast. That is where a low-level disturbance has been bringing severe weather to areas like Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, and Virginia over the last few hours. Luckily, this low pressure system will be moving off the East Coast later tonight. This will allow for a ridge in the southeast United States to dominate, keeping areas much drier and as well as much warmer. And then back up into the northern plains, pretty interesting development. We actually have a high pressure system that's in the lower levels that is starting to collapse down to the south and east. That'll start to allow for the central plains and the Midwest to be much drier, at least for the next 48 hours before the next big event comes, and that'll be our next storm that we'll be talking about here momentarily. But something crazy that's happening in the United States right now is the jet stream, and this is what helps to control the weather patterns in the United States. And you'll notice back up into the northeast United States, this is where the jet stream is right now. There is no jet stream over the central or western side of the United States, which is very uncommon for me. Usually we'll have some sort of big dip in the jet stream with a low pressure system. Whether that's positively or negatively tilted, it doesn't really matter. We usually see something along those lines quite often during May, but we have a pretty stagnant pattern. But things are going to change over the next several days to allow for maybe a bit more of a significant weather pattern change. And that really begins on Thursday. You'll notice back up into the northern United States, that is where our next trough will begin to form. This is going to be positively tilted, which does not mean that we won't see severe weather, but usually the severe weather threat with these are a bit lower. And then stronger upper level winds will start to dominate over the Midwest, so any supercells that do end up developing on either Thursday night or into Friday in the Midwest, they could actually last a bit longer due to those stronger upper level winds. Once we go through later Friday into Saturday, that low pressure system continues to move off to the east, and eventually by next week, we really do not have any organized patterns still. So really the best chance for significant severe weather will likely be Thursday through maybe Saturday or so here in the United States. But for right now, the best chance for severe weather will be on Friday. The Storm Prediction Center has already issued a slight risk of severe weather across the southern plains, and I would not be surprised if we have a risk of severe weather all the way back through areas into the Midwest. As all the ingredients start to come together for some severe weather, we'll have some buoyancy, we'll have a lot of instability as well, especially in the southern plains, and along with that, we'll have a nice cold front that'll be able to help to aid the threat of severe weather. Now, for the setup, it's going to be quite interesting because this is something, again, that's not something we've seen yet this year in the United States. The dew points are one of the biggest key factors with this. You'll notice in the southeast United States, tons of humidity. Now, we do have a high pressure system in the lower levels that is weak, but it is crashing down. That's going to kind of start to push those dew points further down to the south, basically making areas in the Midwest a bit drier over the next few days. And this will actually help to limit the severe weather just a little bit in the Midwest going into Thursday and as well as into Friday. You'll notice going into Thursday, again, the dew points that are the highest are way down in here in the southern plains and as well as into southeast. But notice the low pressure system starts to develop. We get somewhat of a pull of humidity back up into the Midwest. It's not the most impressive pull we've ever seen. Again, this is a positively tilted trough. When we have a negatively tilted trough, we usually get a much stronger pull of humidity. Once we go into Friday, dew points start to get up there a little bit. So you'll notice dew points into the low 60s across parts of the Midwest, and they're much higher into the southern plains, which is where that slight risk of severe weather is right now for Friday. And that is where a lot more buoyancy will be, and as well as instability. That will increase the threat of severe weather Friday, and then eventually going into Saturday, those dew points will still be the highest, essentially from about areas in West Virginia into areas like the southern plains. But still, our best chance for severe weather looks to be Friday as all those ingredients really come together. Let's break down the future radar across the country. Beginning with tomorrow, we'll be looking at some showers and storms up in the northern plains, and as well as into the southeast United States. We might have some thunderstorm activity explode. A lot of that will be somewhat capped off due to that upper level ridge that's not going to be very strong, but it's going to be weakening over the next 24 to 48 hours. So some storm activity may fire up there. Going into Thursday, that is when a more organized low pressure system will end up developing back up into the Midwest and the far northern plains. This is where we're going to see the next threat for at least some severe weather. Once we go through late Thursday, the best chance for severe weather right now is going to be on the southern tail of this cold front back into the central and southern plains from the Texas Panhandle back into areas like central and western Kansas. Once we go into Friday, this low pressure system continues to move off to the east. We'll be watching for severe weather back into the southern plains. This will be mainly for large hail and damaging winds. I'll talk about more specific details on that here in a moment. And then once we go into late Friday into Saturday, that low pressure system moves off to the east, with still our best chance for severe weather being very far south of where that low pressure system is. You might be wondering, why is the threat of severe weather much higher on the southern end of this in comparison to closer to that low pressure system? One of the biggest reasons why is because, again, the dew points I already mentioned, they're not going to be very high in the Midwest. In addition to that, look at the instability going into Friday. There's hardly anything back up into the Midwest in terms of instability. It is very minimal. If not, there's going to be basically no instability. So thunderstorms becoming severe is very unlikely, but you'll notice back down in the southern plains, there's plenty of instability there for at least some severe weather, which would mainly be for the threat of large hail and as well as damaging winds, but don't rule out that tornado threat quite yet. Once we look at the low-level jet, this is essentially the lower-level rotation with supercells. It helps to really create the threat for tornadoes. And once we go into Thursday into Friday, notice down in the southern plains going into Friday around lunchtime, there is a little bit of a low-level jet, around 30 knots or so. That's where it's going to kind of peak. So there is a low-end threat for at least a couple of tornadoes. It's not going to be a outbreak by any means or anything like that, but we very well could see a couple of tornadoes out of those storms that do end up developing on Friday. So keep that in mind. Again, it's not a huge risk, but it is something to keep a close eye on. Now, for the severe weather threat in the short term, we do have another risk of severe weather tomorrow. That is across the very far western plains, essentially. So in the Rocky Mountains back through the Panhandle of Texas, this is primarily going to be for some large hail and damaging winds. And then going into Thursday, there is another threat of severe weather on tossing trampolines on trees Thursday. That is where we have currently a threat of severe weather from Oklahoma all the way back through the western side of Texas. That is going to be mainly for damaging winds and, again, some large hail. Before the timing, overall, the morning will be pretty dry, but by the afternoon, we'll have some sporadic storms develop on the western side of Texas. These will be mainly comprised of damaging winds up to 65, maybe 70 miles per hour, and as well as some sporadic hail, but otherwise not very concerning there. And then eventually going into early Thursday morning, there might be a few showers and storms, but none of those would be severe. And then for flying fences Friday, we'll have some showers and storms develop, most likely during the afternoon hours, right around lunchtime across Oklahoma and maybe along the Red River Valley or along North Texas. Eventually going into the evening hours, this will probably collapse as a line of storms, but again, we're still a few days out, so some of these things could change as we get closer, but definitely something to be watching out for as we do get closer. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was the temperatures overall across the United States. No big temperature changes other than when that low pressure system develops in the Midwest. We'll see some colder air start to usher into areas like the Midwest and as well as eventually through the Ohio Valley by the weekend. But overall, again, temperatures will be fairly around average across the United States. Maybe a quick shot of cold air in the far northern parts of New England, but overall, no big concerns in terms of heat waves or as well as cold blasts here in the United States over the next several days. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already. This forecast is brought to you by Platinum Contracting and All That's Repair.